I never thought a space heater would be the thing that finally brought down Patricia Hendricks and her iron-fisted reign over the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. But here we are, 6 months later, and I still can't believe how it all went down. My name is Preston Fitzgerald, and I have lived in Meadowbrook Hills, a planned community just outside Columbus, Ohio, for exactly 3 years when this whole mess started. I bought my house at 4782 Willow Creek Drive back in 2023, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a 2-car garage that I converted into a workshop. I am a freelance furniture maker, which means I spend a lot of time in that garage, sanding wood and assembling custom pieces for clients all over the central Ohio area. The work is good, pays the bills, and lets me be my own boss. The trouble started on a Friday in late January 2026. Ohio winters are no joke, and that particular week had been brutal. Temperatures had dropped to single digits at night, and the forecast was calling for below-zero wind chills over the weekend. I had 3 commissioned pieces to finish before Monday, including a dining table for a client in Dublin who was already getting impatient about the delivery date. My garage, like most garages, was not exactly climate-controlled. The builder had installed basic insulation when the house was constructed, but it was never meant to be a comfortable workspace in the dead of winter. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I went to the hardware store on Thursday afternoon and bought a space heater. Nothing fancy, just a standard electric unit with an automatic shut-off feature and all the safety certifications you could ask for. I set it up in the corner of my garage, well away from any sawdust or materials, plugged it into a dedicated outlet, and got to work. The heater worked perfectly. My garage stayed a comfortable 65 degrees. My fingers did not go numb while I was working with the hand tools, and I made excellent progress on all 3 pieces. By Friday evening, I was feeling pretty good about my chances of meeting the Monday deadline. That is when Patricia showed up. I heard the doorbell ring around 6:30, just as I was cleaning up for the night. I walked through the house and opened the front door to find Patricia standing on my porch, her arms crossed over her chest and her face pinched into that expression of perpetual disapproval that I had come to know all too well over the past 3 years. Patricia was 52 years old, with short blonde hair, styled in what I can only describe as a speak-to-the-manager cut, and she wore her position as president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA board like a crown. "Preston," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. "We need to talk about the violation." "What violation?" I asked, genuinely confused. "The space heater in your garage," she said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "Mrs. Chen from across the street noticed it through your garage window this afternoon and reported it to the board." I blinked at her. "You are telling me that someone reported me for having a space heater in my own garage?" "It is a clear violation of Section 7, Paragraph 12 of the HOA bylaws," Patricia said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what I assumed was a digital copy of our community rules. "No homeowner shall operate portable heating devices in any outdoor structure, including but not limited to garages, sheds, and patios, due to fire hazard concerns." "Patricia, it is not an outdoor structure. It is an attached garage, and the heater has every safety feature imaginable." "Attached or not, it is classified as a garage, which falls under the outdoor structure category according to our interpretation of the bylaws," she said, her voice taking on that lecturing tone she loved so much. "The board voted on this interpretation back in 2019, and it has been our policy ever since." "You cannot be serious," I said. "It is 9 degrees outside, and I have work to do." "That is not the HOA's concern," Patricia replied. "You are in violation, and the fine is $500. You have until Monday to pay it and remove the heater, or the fine will increase to $1,000. I felt my blood pressure rising. $500 for a space heater? "The amount is clearly stated in the enforcement schedule," she said. "You received a copy when you purchased your home. If you have any questions, you can attend the next board meeting and file a formal complaint, but the fine stands regardless." "This is absolutely ridiculous," I said. "Ridiculous or not, it is the rule," Patricia said. "I expect the heater to be removed by tomorrow morning. I will be conducting a drive-by inspection at 10 o'clock. Good evening, Preston." She turned and walked back to her white Lexus SUV, which she had parked directly in front of my house, as if to make sure everyone on the street knew she was here on official HOA business. I watched her drive away, then slam my door harder than I probably should have. My girlfriend, Dana Norton, came downstairs a few minutes later. She had been working in the home office we set up in one of the spare bedrooms, finishing up some graphic design projects for her own freelance clients. Dana and I had been together for 2 years, and she had moved in about 6 months ago. She was 31, with dark brown hair and a much more patient personality than I possessed, especially when it came to dealing with Patricia and the HOA. "Let me guess," Dana said. "Patricia?" $500 fine for the space heater, I said, still fuming. Apparently it is a fire hazard to keep warm while working in my own garage. Dana sighed. That woman has way too much time on her hands. "She said I have until tomorrow morning to remove it, or the fine doubles," I said. "How am I supposed to finish these pieces without heat?" "Can you work inside?" Dana asked. "Not with the sanding and staining I still need to do," I said. "The fumes would be terrible, and I do not have enough space to lay everything out properly." "What if you just kept the heater and paid the fine?" Dana suggested. "I mean, it is worth it if you can finish the work, right?" I considered it for a moment, but the principle of the thing bothered me too much. "I'm not paying Patricia $500 for doing nothing wrong," I said. "That is extortion, plain and simple." "So what are you going to do?" Dana asked. "I am going to finish the work tonight," I said. "And then I'm going to remove the heater before her stupid inspection tomorrow morning. After that, I'm going to start documenting every single thing that woman does wrong, because I guarantee you she is not following every rule in that precious bylaws document." Dana gave me a knowing look. "Preston, you know how she gets when people challenge her authority." "I do not care," I said. "Someone needs to stand up to her eventually." I went back to the garage and worked until almost 2 in the morning, taking advantage of the space heater while I still could. The temperature outside had dropped to 6 degrees, and the wind was howling like something out of a horror movie. I finished the final coat of stain on the dining table and got the other 2 pieces ready for delivery. By the time I unplugged the space heater and brought it inside, I was exhausted and still angry about the whole situation. Saturday morning came too quickly. I woke up at 9:30 and dragged myself out of bed, knowing Patricia would be by in half an hour. Dana made coffee while I double-checked that the garage looked acceptable by HOA standards. The space heater was in our basement, the workbench was clean, and there was nothing Patricia could possibly complain about. Sure enough, at exactly 10 o'clock, I saw her white Lexus roll slowly past my house. She stopped directly in front of my driveway and actually got out to peer through the garage window just to make absolutely sure the heater was gone. I watched from the living room window as she made notes on her phone, then got back in her car and drove away. "Unbelievable," I muttered. "At least she is gone," Dana said. "Are you still getting the fine?" "Probably," I said. "She will claim it is for yesterday's violation, regardless of whether I removed it or not." I was right. On Monday afternoon, I received an official letter from the HOA, complete with Patricia's signature, informing me that I owed $500 for the space heater violation observed on Friday, January 24th. The letter included instructions for payment and a stern warning that future violations would result in more severe penalties, including potential legal action. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the letter for the 3rd time, and decided I had reached my limit. If Patricia wanted to play hardball, I could play hardball too. I spent the rest of Monday evening going through every single page of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA bylaws, looking for anything that might give me leverage. What I found was interesting. According to Section 14, Paragraph 8, all HOA funds were required to be maintained in accounts with full transparency, and any expenditure over $1,000 required approval from a majority of the board, not just the president. I also found that Section 9 required the HOA to maintain all common areas, including the clubhouse, in good working condition with specific provisions for winterization of all pipes and heating systems. That last part got me thinking. The Meadowbrook Hills Clubhouse was a decent-sized building at the center of our development with a meeting room, a small gym, and a kitchen area that residents could rent out for parties and events. Patricia was fanatical about the clubhouse, treating it like her personal kingdom. She held the board meetings there every month and frequently used it for her own social gatherings. I decided to take a walk over to the clubhouse on Tuesday afternoon just to see how well Patricia was maintaining it. The temperature had dropped even further, with forecasts calling for -5 degrees overnight. The entire state of Ohio was under a wind chill advisory, and local news stations were warning people to avoid unnecessary travel. When I got to the clubhouse, I noticed something odd right away. There were no lights on inside, and the building looked completely dark. I walked around to the side entrance and tried the door, which was unlocked. Inside, the temperature felt barely warmer than outside. I checked the thermostat in the main room and saw it was set to 50 degrees. 50 degrees. In the middle of a historic cold snap. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures of the thermostat, the dark interior, and the obviously inadequate heating situation. Then I went to the basement access door, which was also unlocked, and carefully made my way downstairs. The basement housed all the mechanical systems for the building, including the furnace and the water heater. What I found down there was even more concerning. The furnace was running, but barely. It was an old unit, probably original to when the clubhouse was built in the early 2000s, and it was clearly struggling to keep up with demand. More importantly, I could see several exposed pipes along the ceiling, running from the water heater to the upstairs bathroom and kitchen. None of those pipes had any insulation on them, and in the current temperature conditions, they were at serious risk of freezing. I took more pictures, documenting everything I could see. This was a clear violation of the HOA's own bylaws about maintaining common areas. If those pipes froze and burst, the damage would be extensive and expensive. I thought about calling Patricia right then and there to warn her, but something stopped me. Why should I do her job for her? She had been so eager to find me $500 for a completely safe space heater, but she could not be bothered to properly maintain the one building she was supposed to be responsible for. Let her deal with the consequences of her own negligence. I left the clubhouse and walked back home, my mind already working through the possibilities. If the pipes did freeze, it would be a disaster for the HOA, and Patricia would be directly responsible. The board would have to answer for it, and maybe, just maybe, the other homeowners would finally see what kind of leader she really was. Donna was in the kitchen when I got back. "Where did you go?" she asked. "The clubhouse," I said. "You're not going to believe this." I showed her the pictures on my phone and explained what I had found. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the images. "Preston, those pipes are definitely going to freeze," she said. "It is supposed to be -5 tonight." "I know," I said. Should not you tell someone?" Dana asked. "I mean, I get that you are mad at Patricia, but this could cause serious damage." "Patricia is the president of the HOA," I said. "It is literally her job to make sure the clubhouse is maintained properly. If she is not bothered to check it herself, that is on her." "But what if it floods into other units or causes problems for the neighbors?" Dana pressed. "The clubhouse is a standalone building," I said. "It is not going to affect anyone's home. The worst that happens is the HOA has to pay for repairs, which is exactly what our dues are supposed to cover." Donna looked uncertain, but she did not argue further. We spent the rest of Tuesday evening watching the temperature drop on the weather app. By 10 o'clock, it was already at 0 degrees. By midnight, it had dropped to -3. I went to bed that night with my phone on the nightstand, half expecting to get some kind of emergency notification from the HOA. Nothing came through. Wednesday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. Most of them were from Patricia, but several were from other board members and neighbors. I sat up in bed and opened the first text message from Patricia. "Emergency at clubhouse. Pipes burst. Need all homeowners to respond immediately." I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and concern. I had been right about the pipes, but now I needed to see how bad the damage actually was. I got dressed quickly and walked over to the clubhouse with Dana following close behind. The scene was chaos. Water was pouring out from under the main entrance door, creating a small river that was freezing into ice as it spread across the parking lot. Patricia was standing outside in her expensive winter coat, screaming into her phone at someone. 3 other board members were there too, looking helpless and cold. Several neighbors had gathered to watch the disaster unfold. What happened? I asked one of the neighbors, a guy named Tom who lived 2 streets over. Pipes froze and burst sometime during the night, Tom said. Patricia got here around 7 this morning to set up for a meeting and found the whole place flooded. The water main is still running. They are trying to get someone out here to shut it off. I watched as Patricia continued to yell into her phone. A few minutes later, a city utility truck pulled up, and 2 workers got out to assess the situation. It took them another 20 minutes to locate the main shutoff valve and stop the water flow. By the time they finished, there were at least 3 inches of standing water inside the clubhouse, and more water was still draining out. The damage was going to be significant. Patricia finally hung up her phone and turned to address the growing crowd of homeowners. Her face was red, and she looked like she was barely holding it together. "We have a situation," she announced, her voice shaking slightly. "The clubhouse has sustained significant water damage due to frozen pipes. We are going to need to assess the full extent of the damage and determine next steps. In the meantime, the clubhouse is closed until further notice." "How did this happen?" someone called out from the crowd. "It was the cold weather," Patricia said quickly. "The temperatures were unprecedented and the pipes could not handle it. I could not stay quiet anymore." "Patricia, what was the thermostat set to?" She turned to glare at me. "What?" "Inside the clubhouse," I said. "What temperature was the thermostat set to?" "I do not see how that is relevant," she said. "It is absolutely relevant," I said, pulling out my phone. "Because I was in the clubhouse yesterday afternoon, and the thermostat was set to 50 degrees. That is nowhere near warm enough to prevent pipes from freezing in this kind of weather." The crowd started murmuring. Patricia's face went even redder. "You were trespassing," she said. "The door was unlocked," I countered. "And even if it was trespassing, that does not change the fact that you failed to properly maintain the building. I have pictures showing the thermostat setting, the inadequate heating, and the exposed pipes in the basement, all of which are violations of Section 9 of the HOA bylaws." Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. "This is not the time for your petty grievances, Preston." "Petty grievances?" I said, my voice rising. "You fined me $500 for using a safe, certified space heater in my own garage to keep warm while I worked. Meanwhile, you could not be bothered to make sure our community clubhouse had adequate heating during a record cold snap. Do you have any idea how much this is going to cost to repair?" One of the other board members, a man named Richard who rarely spoke up at meetings, cleared his throat. "Preston has a point, Patricia. We should have had the heat set higher, especially with this weather forecast." "I set it to a reasonable temperature," Patricia insisted. 50 degrees should have been sufficient." "It is not sufficient when the outside temperature drops below 0, I said. "Any contractor or building manager would tell you that. You need to keep the heat at least 60, preferably 65, to ensure the pipes do not freeze." "How would you know?" Patricia snapped. "Because I own a house and I know how to take care of it," I said. "Unlike some people." The crowd was fully engaged now, with people pulling out their own phones to take pictures and videos of the flooding. I could see Patricia realizing that she was losing control of the narrative. "Everyone needs to go home," she said loudly. "This is an HOA matter and we will handle it through the proper channels. There is nothing to see here." But people were not leaving. They were asking questions, demanding answers, and taking more pictures. I spotted Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who had reported my space heater, standing near the back of the crowd with her arms crossed. She looked uncomfortable. The utility workers finished their assessment and approached Patricia with clipboards. "Madam, we have shut off the water main to this building, but you are going to need to call a restoration company immediately. This much water damage needs professional cleanup, or you're going to have mold problems within 48 hours. "How much is that going to cost?" Patricia asked. The worker shrugged. "Hard to say without seeing the full extent of the damage, but you are probably looking at $20,000 to $30,000 minimum, maybe more if the subflooring is damaged or if there is structural issues." The crowd gasped. Patricia looked like she might faint. "The HOA insurance will cover it," she said weakly. "You better hope so," the worker said. "And you better have documentation of regular maintenance because insurance companies do not like to pay out for negligence." That word hung in the air. Negligence. Patricia tried to regain control. "Everyone, please return to your homes. The board will send out an official communication later today with more information. There is nothing more to discuss right now." People slowly started to disperse. but I could hear them talking amongst themselves. The word negligence kept coming up, along with questions about how the HOA was managing our dues. I walked back home with Dana, feeling vindicated but also aware that this was probably just the beginning of something much bigger. "You really went after her out there," Dana said once we were inside. "She deserved it," I said. "She has been pushing people around for years, and nobody has stood up to her. Maybe this will finally wake people up." Later that afternoon, I received an email from the HOA board. It was a generic message explaining that the clubhouse had sustained water damage and would be closed indefinitely for repairs. It made no mention of the cause of the damage or who was responsible. It also included a notice that there would be an emergency assessment of $200 per household to cover immediate restoration costs while the insurance claim was being processed. I immediately responded to the email, copying all the board members and demanding a full accounting of how this happened and why homeowners should be responsible for paying an assessment when the damage was clearly due to improper maintenance. I attached the photos I had taken at the clubhouse the day before, showing the inadequate heating and exposed pipes. Within an hour, my inbox exploded with responses from other homeowners who had seen my email. They were angry, confused, and demanding answers. Several people pointed out that they had been paying HOA dues faithfully for years and expected the board to properly maintain common areas. Others shared their own stories of Patricia's overreach and petty enforcement of minor rule violations. Patricia sent a scathing response, accusing me of undermining the board and creating discord in the community. She claimed that my photos were taken out of context and that the heating had been adequate according to manufacturer specifications. She also threatened legal action if I continued to spread misinformation. I did not back down. I responded with a detailed breakdown of the HOA bylaws regarding common area maintenance, including specific citations to sections that required proper winterization and adequate heating. I also pointed out that the emergency assessment was improper under the bylaws because it had not been approved by a vote of the full board, only announced unilaterally by Patricia. The email chain grew longer and more heated over the next several days. More homeowners joined in, questioning Patricia's leadership and demanding a special meeting to address the situation. The board members who were not Patricia tried to calm things down, but it was clear that the community was fracturing. On Friday, exactly 1 week after Patricia had fined me for the space heater, I received a certified letter from an attorney representing the HOA. The letter demanded that I cease and desist from making defamatory statements about Patricia and the board, and it threatened a lawsuit for damages if I did not comply. It also informed me that the $500 fine for the space heater violation had been increased to $1,000 due to my continued harassment of HOA leadership. I took the letter to a lawyer friend of mine, Marcus, who practiced civil litigation in Columbus. He read through it carefully, then looked up at me with raised eyebrows. "This is one of the weakest cease and desist letters I've ever seen," Marcus said. "Nothing you have said in those emails is defamatory. You are stating facts, providing photographic evidence, and citing the actual bylaws. If anything, they are the ones who should be worried about legal exposure." "So what should I do?" I asked. "Do not back down," Marcus said. "In fact, I think you should file a formal complaint with the board, demanding Patricia's removal for breach of fiduciary duty. She clearly failed to maintain the clubhouse properly, and that failure has cost the HOA tens of thousands of dollars. The other board members need to be held accountable too." "Can I do that?" I asked. "Absolutely," Marcus said. "Your bylaws should have a provision for removing board members for cause. Let me look at them." I sent him a copy of the full Meadowbrook Hills HOA bylaws, and he spent the next hour going through them with a fine-tooth comb. When he finished, he had a smile on his face. "This is perfect," he said. Section 22 allows for the removal of any board member by a vote of the homeowners if a petition is signed by at least 20% of the households in the community. You have what? About 200 homes in Meadowbrook Hills? 212, I said. "So you need signatures from at least 43 households," Marcus said. "Based on the email responses you showed me, I think you can get that easily." "What happens after I get the signatures?" I asked. "You submit the petition to the board, and they are required to hold a special election within 30 days, Marcus said. At that election, the homeowners vote on whether to remove Patricia from the board. Simple majority wins. I left Marcus's office feeling energized. This was exactly what I needed to do. I spent the weekend drafting a petition for Patricia's removal, citing her failure to maintain the clubhouse, her unilateral imposition of an improper emergency assessment, and her pattern of selective enforcement of HOA rules. I made sure every claim was backed up with evidence and citations to the bylaws. On Monday morning, I started going door to door in the neighborhood, explaining the situation and asking people to sign the petition. The response was overwhelming. People were angry about the emergency assessment, angry about the clubhouse damage, and angry about years of Patricia's overbearing leadership. By Monday evening, I had 47 signatures. By Tuesday afternoon, I had 63. I submitted the petition to the HOA board on Wednesday, February 5th, exactly 2 weeks after the pipes had burst. I sent it via certified mail and also emailed copies to all the board members. According to the bylaws, they had 5 business days to acknowledge receipt and schedule the special election. Patricia's response came within hours. She sent an email to the entire neighborhood accusing me of orchestrating a coup and claiming that I was acting out of personal vendetta because of the space heater fine. She said the petition was invalid because it was based on false and misleading information and that the board would not be scheduling any special election. That was a mistake on her part. By refusing to follow the bylaws, she gave me exactly the ammunition I needed. I forwarded Patricia's email to Marcus, who immediately drafted a formal legal demand letter on behalf of all the homeowners who had signed the petition. The letter explained that the petition was valid under Section 22 of the bylaws, that the board was legally required to schedule a special election within 30 days, and that failure to do so would result in legal action against the board members personally, not just the HOA as an entity. The threat of personal liability got the other board members' attention. Richard, the board member who had spoken up at the clubhouse, called me on Thursday evening. "Preston, this is getting out of hand," he said. "We need to find a way to resolve this without lawyers getting involved." "The resolution is simple," I said. "Follow the bylaws and schedule the election." "Patricia is refusing to agree to it," Richard said. "She says it sets a bad precedent and that we cannot let one homeowner dictate how the board operates." "It is not one homeowner," I said. "It is 63 homeowners, almost a third of the entire community. And we are not dictating anything. We are following the exact process laid out in the bylaws that everyone agreed to when they bought their homes." Richard sighed. "I know, you are right. But Patricia is threatening to resign if we go through with the election, and if she resigns, we lose our quorum. We need at least 3 board members to conduct official business." "Then recruit new board members," I said. "I am sure there are plenty of people who would be willing to serve." "It is not that simple," Richard said. "Look, can we meet in person, maybe at a neutral location? I think we can work this out." I agreed to meet him the next day at a coffee shop in Dublin, about 20 minutes from Meadowbrook Hills. Richard showed up looking tired and stressed. He ordered a large black coffee and sat down across from me. "Patricia has been running this HOA like her personal fiefdom for almost 8 years, he said quietly. "I know she has issues with control, but she also does a lot of the day-to-day work that nobody else wants to do. If we remove her, who is going to take over?" "Someone who actually follows the rules," I said. "Someone who does not fine people for ridiculous violations while ignoring serious maintenance problems." "I get it," Richard said, "and I'm not defending what happened with the clubhouse. That was a major screw-up. But you have to understand, Patricia was trying to save money on the heating bill. The HOA budget is tight, and we have been trying to keep assessments low. So instead of a slightly higher heating bill, we now have a $30,000 repair bill and an emergency assessment," I said. "That is not saving money. That is financial incompetence." Richard nodded slowly. "You are right. Look, here is what I can offer. The board will schedule the special election as required. We will do it 3 weeks from now, on February 26th. In the meantime, Patricia will agree to step back from day-to-day operations, and I will take over as acting president. We will also waive your space heater fine and reimburse you the money if you already paid it." "I did not pay it," I said, and I am not withdrawing the petition just because you offer to waive an illegal fine." "I am not asking you to withdraw it," Richard said. "I am just asking you to let the process play out fairly. We will schedule the election, we will notify all homeowners, and they can vote their conscience. If they want Patricia gone, she will be gone. If they want to keep her, she stays. Democratic process." I considered it. Richard seemed sincere, and his offer to step back Patricia from active leadership was at least a step in the right direction. "Vikiv, fine," I said, "but I want it in writing. Official notice from the board that the election is scheduled for February 26th, that all homeowners will be notified, and that Patricia is stepping back from active decision-making until the election is resolved." "Done," Richard said. He pulled out his phone and started typing. Within 10 minutes, I had an official email from the HOA board confirming everything we had discussed. The next 3 weeks were tense. Patricia largely stayed out of sight, though I heard from neighbors that she was making phone calls and visiting people's homes to campaign against the petition. She was telling people that I was a troublemaker who wanted to destroy the community, that the clubhouse damage was not her fault, and that removing her would lead to chaos. I did not need to campaign. The facts spoke for themselves. I created a simple one-page document laying out the timeline of events: the space heater fine, the inadequate clubhouse heating, the burst pipes, the improper emergency assessment, and Patricia's refusal to follow the bylaws. I dropped copies in everyone's mailbox and let them draw their own conclusions. Dana was supportive, but worried. "What if she wins?" she asked one evening as we were making dinner. "Then I will have tried," I said, "but I do not think she will win. Too many people are fed up with her." The restoration work at the clubhouse was ongoing. The insurance company had sent adjusters out to assess the damage, and I heard through the grapevine that they were asking tough questions about the maintenance records and heating settings. Apparently, the adjusters had found the same issues I had documented in my photos, and they were not happy about it. On February 20th, 6 days before the election, I received another surprise. A local news reporter from a Columbus television station called me and asked if I would be willing to do an interview about the HOA situation. Apparently, someone in the neighborhood had tipped them off about the story, and they thought it would make for an interesting segment about HOA overreach. I agreed to the interview, and they came out to Meadowbrook Hills the next day. The reporter, a woman named Jessica, was professional and asked good questions. I showed her the photos from the clubhouse, explained the timeline of events, and talked about the broader issues of HOA accountability. She also interviewed several other homeowners, including Richard, and, surprisingly, Patricia. Patricia's interview was a disaster for her. She came across as defensive and angry, insisting that the clubhouse damage was an act of God and that I was leading a witch hunt against her. When Jessica pressed her on why the heat had been set to only 50 degrees, Patricia claimed it was industry standard without providing any evidence to back that up. The segment aired on the evening news on February 23rd, 3 days before the election. It was a 5-minute piece that laid out the whole story in a clear, damning narrative. The reporter did not explicitly take sides, but the facts spoke for themselves. The segment ended with a shot of the still-closed clubhouse and a voiceover noting that the special election would be held on February 26th. The reaction in the neighborhood was immediate. My phone blew up with texts and calls from people who had seen the news story. Several people who had been on the fence about the election said they were now definitely voting to remove Patricia. Even Mrs. Chen, who had reported my space heater, sent me an apologetic text saying she had not realized what the larger situation was and that she would be voting for removal. Election day arrived cold but clear. The vote was being held at a local elementary school gym, with polls open from 4 to 8 in the evening to allow people to vote after work. I showed up at 4:15 with Dana, and the place was already packed. I had never seen this level of turnout for an HOA election. Usually, these things were sparsely attended affairs with maybe 20 or 30 people showing up. This time, there had to be at least 100 people in line. Patricia was there, standing near the entrance and trying to talk to people as they came in. She looked haggard, like she had not slept in days. She tried to approach me, but I walked past her without making eye contact. The voting process was simple. Each household got one ballot with a single question. Should Patricia Hendricks be removed from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA Board of Directors? yes or no. I filled out my ballot, checked yes, and dropped it in the locked box. Dana and I stayed to watch the vote counting, which began at 8:30 after the polls closed. Richard and 2 other neutral community members served as the counters, with representatives from both sides observing. Patricia stood on one side of the room with a few supporters. I stood on the other side with a much larger group. The counting took about 45 minutes. When Richard finally stood up to announce the results, the room went completely silent. "Total ballots cast 167, Richard said. For removal, 131. Against removal, 36. Patricia Hendricks has been removed from the HOA board effective immediately." The room erupted in applause. Patricia's face went white, then red. She grabbed her coat and stormed out of the gym without saying a word. A few of her supporters followed her, but most people stayed to discuss what would happen next. Richard addressed the crowd. "We will be holding nominations for a new board member at our next regular meeting in March. In the meantime, I will continue serving as acting president, and we will work on getting the clubhouse repairs finished and addressing the other concerns that have been raised. Thank you all for participating in the democratic process." People started filing out, many of them stopping to shake my hand or thank me for taking action. It felt good, but I also knew this was just the first step. There was still a lot of work to be done to fix the HOA's problems. Over the next few weeks, things slowly started to improve. Richard proved to be a much more reasonable and transparent leader than Patricia had been. He held an open forum meeting where homeowners could voice their concerns and suggestions. He also formed a committee to review the HOA bylaws and recommend updates to address some of the more problematic provisions. The clubhouse repairs were completed in mid-March. The final bill came to $32,000, most of which was covered by insurance. However, the insurance company had determined that the HOA was partially at fault due to inadequate maintenance, so they only paid out 70% of the claim. The remaining $9,000 had to be covered by the HOA's reserve fund, which meant there would be no major community improvement projects for at least a year. The emergency assessment that Patricia had tried to impose was formally rescinded, and homeowners who had already paid were given refunds. Richard also conducted a full audit of the HOA's finances and discovered several questionable expenditures during Patricia's tenure, including charging the HOA for personal meals and travel expenses that were supposedly related to HOA business but had no documentation. That discovery led to another bombshell. Richard brought in a forensic accountant to review the HOA's books more carefully, and what they found was shocking. Over the past 3 years, Patricia had been systematically diverting HOA funds for personal use. It was not huge amounts at any one time, usually a few $100s here and there, but it added up to over $15,000 total. Richard immediately contacted the police and filed a formal complaint. The detective assigned to the case was a no-nonsense woman named Detective Sarah Morrison, who had handled white-collar crime cases for years. She took statements from Richard and the accountant, reviewed all the financial records, and began building a case against Patricia. In mid-April, about 2 months after Patricia's removal from the board, Detective Morrison showed up at Patricia's house with a warrant for her arrest. I was not there to see it, but several neighbors were, and the story spread through Meadowbrook Hills like wildfire. Patricia was charged with theft and embezzlement, both felonies in Ohio. The legal process moved slowly, as these things always do. Patricia hired an expensive defense attorney who tried to argue that the expenditures were legitimate HOA business expenses and that the accounting was just sloppy, not criminal. But the evidence was too strong. The forensic accountant had documented restaurant charges at locations where no HOA business could have possibly been conducted, hotel stays in cities where there were no HOA conferences or events, and even charges for clothing and personal items at retail stores. In August, facing overwhelming evidence, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to 1 count of theft and agreed to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus fines and court costs. The prosecutor recommended a sentence of 6 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation. The judge accepted the recommendation, and Patricia was sentenced on August 15, 2026. I attended the sentencing hearing with Dana and several other Meadowbrook Hills residents. Patricia looked like a shell of her former self, standing before the judge in a gray suit that seemed too big for her. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, Patricia gave a brief statement. "I made mistakes," she said, her voice barely audible. "I let the stress of managing the HOA get to me, and I made poor decisions. I am sorry for what I did, and I accept responsibility for my actions." The judge was not sympathetic. "Mrs. Hendricks, you held a position of trust within your community. You were responsible for managing funds that your neighbors paid in good faith, expecting that money to be used for the benefit of everyone. Instead, you stole from them. You used their money for your own personal benefit, and you did it repeatedly over a period of years. That is not a mistake. That is a crime, and it is a betrayal of trust. I am sentencing you to 6 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation. You will also pay full restitution of $15,347 to the Meadowbrook Hills HOA, plus a fine of $5,000 to the state of Ohio. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia said quietly. She was taken into custody immediately and transported to the Franklin County Jail to begin serving her sentence. As I watched the bailiff lead her away, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. Patricia had spent years bullying people and abusing her authority, and now she was finally facing consequences. But another part of me just felt sad. This whole mess could have been avoided if she had just done her job properly and treated people with basic respect. Dana squeezed my hand as we walked out of the courthouse. "It is over," she said. "Yeah," I said, "it is over." Life in Meadowbrook Hills gradually returned to normal after Patricia's sentencing. Richard continued serving as HOA president and did an excellent job. He was elected to a full term in the annual election that fall, running unopposed. The HOA bylaws were updated to include stronger financial oversight provisions and clearer procedures for homeowner complaints. The clubhouse reopened in September, fully restored and with a new, properly maintained heating system. As for me, I went back to focusing on my furniture business. The client with the dining table was happy with the final product, despite the delay, and he recommended me to several of his friends. Business was good, and I was able to expand my workshop operation. I never got an apology from Patricia, but I did not expect one. Some people are simply incapable of admitting when they're wrong. The $500 fine for the space heater was officially removed from my account, and the HOA even sent me a formal letter of apology for the improper enforcement action. The whole experience taught me a lot about standing up for yourself and not being afraid to challenge authority when it is clearly in the wrong. It also taught me that communities work best when everyone is held accountable to the same standards, regardless of their position or title. On a cold evening in December, almost a year after the whole mess started, I was working in my garage on a custom bookshelf for a client in Upper Arlington. I had a new space heater running, keeping the temperature at a comfortable 68 degrees. Donna came out to bring me a cup of coffee and smiled when she saw the heater. "Think anyone is going to report you this time?" she asked. "Not a chance," I said. "Richard already told me he does not care what people do in their own garages as long as it is safe." "What a concept," Dana said. "An HOA president who actually uses common sense." "Revolutionary," I agreed. We stood there for a moment, enjoying the warmth of the garage and the quiet evening. Through the window, I could see the lights of the clubhouse in the distance, glowing warmly against the winter darkness. The building looked peaceful, properly heated and maintained, exactly as it should be. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The fine, the frozen pipes, the petition, the election, the criminal charges, and finally, Patricia's conviction and imprisonment. It had been a wild ride, and there were moments when I wondered if it was all worth the stress and conflict. But looking around at the community now, seeing how much better things were with accountable leadership and transparent governance, I knew it had been worth it. Sometimes you have to fight for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable or difficult. Sometimes you have to stand up to the bullies and demand better. And sometimes the universe has a way of delivering poetic justice in the most unexpected ways. Patricia had fined me for using a space heater to keep my garage warm while I worked. That same night, her failure to keep the clubhouse warm had resulted in catastrophic damage that ultimately led to her downfall. If that is not karma, I do not know what is. I took a sip of my coffee and got back to work on the bookshelf, the space heater humming quietly in the corner. Outside, the temperature was dropping towards 0 again, but inside my garage, everything was warm and comfortable, just the way it should be. The Meadowbrook Hills, HOA, learned its lessons the hard way, but it learned them. Proper maintenance became a priority, financial oversight became standard practice, and most importantly, homeowners learned that they had power when they stood together and demanded accountability from their leaders. Patricia Hendricks served her 6 months in jail and was released on probation in February 2027. I heard she moved out of Meadowbrook Hills shortly after her release, relocating to somewhere in southern Ohio to live with family. I never saw her again, and that was fine with me. Some chapters in life are better left closed. The new HOA board, under Richard's leadership, implemented a scholarship program for local students using a portion of the HOA dues. They also organized regular community events that actually brought people together instead of driving them apart. The Clubhouse became a hub of activity again, hosting everything from book clubs to children's birthday parties to neighborhood watch meetings. I eventually joined the HOA board myself, serving as the treasurer starting in 2027. It seemed like the responsible thing to do after everything that had happened. I wanted to make sure the financial oversight provisions we had fought for were actually implemented and maintained. It was not glamorous work, but it was important. Looking back on everything now, I realized that the space heater incident was never really about the space heater at all. It was about power, control, and what happens when someone in authority forgets that they are supposed to serve the community, not rule over it. Patricia's downfall was not caused by the frozen pipes, the embezzlement, or even the election. It was caused by her own arrogance and her fundamental failure to understand what leadership actually means. Real leadership is not about enforcing petty rules or wielding authority like a weapon. It is about serving others, making responsible decisions, and being accountable for the consequences of those decisions. Patricia never understood that, and it cost her everything. As for the space heater that started it all, it is still sitting in the corner of my garage, keeping me warm while I work. Every time I turn it on, I'm reminded of the importance of standing up for yourself and fighting for what is right. That $500 fine turned out to be the best investment I never made because it led to real change in our community and taught me lessons I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Sometimes, the smallest sparks can ignite the biggest fires. In this case, a simple space heater sparked a revolution that transformed an entire community. And while the journey was difficult and sometimes painful, the destination was worth every moment of struggle. Meadowbrook Hills is a better place now, and I am proud to have played a part in making it that way. The clubhouse stands warm and welcoming, properly maintained and open to all. The HOA operates with transparency and accountability, and homeowners know that their voices matter and that they have the power to demand better from their leaders, all because I refused to accept an unjust fine for a space heater in my garage. All because Patricia Hendricks let her pride and her pursuit of control blind her to her own responsibilities. And all because, on one cold January night, the pipes in the clubhouse froze and burst, setting in motion a chain of events that nobody could have predicted. That is the thing about consequences. They do not care about your intentions or your excuses. They only care about your actions. Patricia's actions led to her imprisonment and the loss of everything she had worked to build. My actions led to positive change and a stronger community. In the end, we all got exactly what we deserved. And that, more than anything else, is the real justice of this story.